Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowy chambers of Renaissance Italy, where the very concept of a full night's sleep would seem utterly foreign to you. Picture yourself in a cramped Florentine tenement, circa 1450, where the acrid smell of tallow candles mingles with the distant clatter of night watchmen's boots on cobblestone. You're lying on a straw mattress that's seen better decades, wrapped in rough wool that scratches against your skin. And here's the kicker: you're not planning to sleep through until dawn. You probably won't survive this without questioning everything you thought you knew about rest. You see, Renaissance Italians didn't just toss and turn once before settling into 8 hours of blissful unconsciousness like we pretend to do today. No, they had this fascinating practice called first sleep and second sleep, with a deliberate period of wakefulness sandwiched right in the middle of the night. Imagine waking up at 2 a.m. not because your neighbor's dog is barking, but because that's exactly what your body expects you to do, Dad. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting back to that Renaissance bedroom now, where the night stretches ahead of you in 2 distinct chapters. The first sleep, or primo sonno, as the Italians called it, typically began shortly after sunset, which without electric lighting meant around 8 or 9 p.m. depending on the season. You'd settle into your bed, often shared with family members because privacy was a luxury few could afford, and slip into what historians describe as a deep, restorative slumber. But here's where it gets interesting. This first sleep wasn't meant to last all night. After roughly 4 hours, somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m., you'd naturally wake up, not groggily, not reluctantly, but alert and refreshed, as if your internal clock had been perfectly calibrated for this moment. This wasn't insomnia or a sleep disorder. This was the expected rhythm of human rest. During this middle-of-the-night awakening, called la veglia, or the watch, you wouldn't panic about lost sleep or reach for your phone to scroll mindlessly through social media. Instead, you'd engage in what might be the most productive hour or 2 of your entire day. Some people used this time for prayer and meditation, kneeling on cold stone floors while whispering devotions to saints whose names you could barely pronounce. Others would tend to fires that had died down, ensuring the household wouldn't freeze before morning. The more romantically let's be honest, without Netflix, people had to get creative, would use this quiet hour for intimate conversations with their spouses. Historians still argue whether this period contributed to higher birth rates, but the evidence suggests that many couples found this midnight interlude perfect for both emotional and physical intimacy. It was their time away from the prying eyes of children and the demands of daily labor. You might also use this wakeful period for light household tasks, checking on livestock, preparing ingredients for the next day's meals, or mending clothes by candlelight. The wealthy might read or write letters, though literacy rates meant this was hardly universal. Some would simply lie in bed, thinking and planning, processing the events of the day in a way that our constantly stimulated modern minds rarely allow. The fascinating thing about this biphasic sleep pattern is how natural it felt to Renaissance Italians. They didn't fight it or see it as a problem to be solved. Court records from the period mention people scheduling meetings during the watch, and literature from the era references this midnight awakening as casually as we might mention lunch break. It was simply part of the human experience. After an hour or two of this quiet activity, you'd feel drowsiness returning. This was the signal for secondo sano, second sleep. You'd settle back into bed, often feeling more relaxed than when you first lay down hours earlier. This second sleep would carry you through until dawn, typically lasting another 3 to 4 hours. The beauty of this system becomes apparent when you consider the natural rhythms it honored, without artificial lighting flooding your retinas with blue wavelengths. Your circadian rhythms followed a more organic pattern. Melatonin production would spike earlier in the evening, facilitating that first deep sleep. Then, as levels naturally dipped in the middle of the night, you'd experience that gentle awakening. A second wave of drowsiness would arrive a couple of hours later, ushering in the second sleep phase. Modern sleep researchers have actually studied this pattern and found that when people are isolated from artificial light for extended periods, many naturally fall into this biphasic rhythm. It suggests that our ancestors weren't doing something strange or inefficient. They were simply following their biology in a way that our electrically illuminated world has largely overridden. But Renaissance Italy wasn't just following biology. This sleep pattern served practical purposes in their specific historical context. Security was a constant concern in medieval and Renaissance cities. Having a portion of the population naturally awake during the darkest hours meant there were always eyes and ears alert for trouble. Night watchmen weren't the only ones keeping guard. Ordinary citizens, lying awake during their natural rest period, formed an informal network of surveillance. The practice also aligned perfectly with the religious rhythms that dominated Renaissance Italian life. Monastic communities had long observed lauds and other midnight prayers, and lay people could participate in this spiritual discipline without disrupting their sleep entirely. You'd wake naturally, offer prayers or meditate, then return to sleep feeling spiritually refreshed. Economically, the two-sleep system made sense in a world where daylight was precious and artificial lighting expensive. By maximizing the use of natural darkness for rest and reserving costly candles or oil lamps for essential tasks, families could stretch their resources further. That midnight hour of wakefulness could be incredibly productive without requiring significant expenditure on illumination. You're settling deeper into this Renaissance rhythm now, feeling how natural this divided night becomes after just a few cycles. The cobblestone streets outside your imaginary Venetian home are silent, except for the occasional splash of water against canal walls and the distant call of a night watchman announcing that all is well. Your body has learned to expect this gentle awakening, and instead of fighting it, you embrace the quiet productivity it offers. The social implications of this sleep pattern were profound in ways that might surprise you. Imagine a world where everyone shared this common experience of midnight wakefulness. It created a sort of secret society of the sleepless, a community bound by their shared alertness during the darkest hours. Neighbors might whisper conversations through thin walls, knowing that others were likely awake too. This wasn't considered rude or disruptive. It was simply part of the natural order. Historical records from Renaissance Italy reveal fascinating glimpses into how people used their watch time. Artisans would sometimes continue delicate work that required concentration, taking advantage of the profound quiet to focus on intricate details. Goldsmiths, in particular, found this midnight hour perfect for the most precise aspects of their craft. The stillness meant fewer vibrations, fewer distractions, and often better results than they could achieve during the bustling daylight hours. Women often used this time for textile work, spinning, weaving, or embroidery that required careful attention. By candlelight, they'd create the elaborate fabrics that Renaissance Italy was famous for, their fingers moving with practiced precision while the rest of the household slept. Some of the most beautiful tapestries and garments from this period may well have been crafted during these quiet midnight hours, but here's where it gets deliciously scandalous. This wakeful period also became prime time for activities that needed to happen away from prying eyes. Love affairs, political conspiracies, and business dealings that couldn't bear daylight scrutiny all found their perfect moment during the watch. The darkness provided cover, and the fact that many people were naturally awake meant that unusual activity was less likely to draw attention. Court records from Florence and other Italian city-states occasionally reference crimes or disputes that occurred during these midnight hours, suggesting that not everyone used their wake time for wholesome activities. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern actually contributed to higher rates of certain types of crime, or whether it simply provided a different temporal framework for human mischief that would have occurred anyway. The medical understanding of sleep during the Renaissance was, shall we say, charmingly primitive by modern standards. Physicians believed that sleep was governed by the balance of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They thought that the first sleep helped to cook the food in your stomach, while the second sleep allowed the body to distribute the resulting nutrients throughout your system. It's adorable in its complete wrongness, but it shows how seriously they took the natural division of nighttime. Rest. Renaissance doctors also believed that the quality of your sleep was influenced by your sleeping position, the phase of the moon, and even the direction your bed faced. They recommended sleeping on your right side during first sleep to aid digestion, then switching to your left side for second sleep to help the liver process toxins. Whether anyone actually followed this advice is questionable, but it demonstrates how the two-sleep system was integrated into medical theory of the time. The wealthy had different experiences of this sleep pattern than the poor, as you might expect. Rich families could afford better heating, which meant their midnight awakening wasn't accompanied by the bone-chilling cold that plagued less fortunate households. They also had access to better lighting, more candles, higher quality oil lamps, and sometimes even the luxury of keeping fires burning through the night. Wealthy Renaissance Italians often used their watch time for intellectual pursuits. They'd read classical texts, write letters to business associates or political allies, or engage in scholarly debates with family members. Some of the great Renaissance correspondence that survives today may have been penned during these quiet midnight hours, when the writer's mind was clear and focused. The poor, meanwhile, had to be more practical with their wakeful time. They might use it to tend to sick family members, repair tools or clothing, or simply rest while remaining alert to potential dangers. In crowded urban tenements, this quiet hour might be the only time when individuals could think their own thoughts, without constant interruption from neighbors and family members. Children adapted to this pattern differently than adults. Young children would often sleep through both phases without waking, their developing brains requiring more continuous rest than adult minds. But by adolescence, most Italian youth had naturally fallen into the family rhythm of first sleep, watch, and second sleep. It became a rite of passage of sorts. Your first conscious experience of the midnight watch marked your transition toward adult sleep patterns. Seasonal variations added another layer of complexity to this system. During the long winter nights, the period between first and second sleep might stretch to 3 hours or more, giving people substantial time for their midnight activities. Summer nights, being shorter, compressed this wakeful period to perhaps just an hour. Renaissance Italians adjusted their expectations and activities accordingly, treating the watch as a flexible rather than rigid part of their routine. The religious calendar also influenced how people used their midnight hours. During Lent, many Catholics would spend their watch time in prayer and contemplation, using the quiet darkness for spiritual discipline. Religious feast days might see families gathering during the watch to share special foods or engage in devotional activities that weren't practical during busy daylight hours. You're becoming more attuned now to the subtle rhythms that governed Renaissance Italian nights, feeling how the darkness itself seemed to breathe with the collective sleep patterns of entire communities. Picture yourself in a Milanese household during the winter of 1475, where the watch period stretches luxuriously long and the activities that fill it have become as ritualized as morning prayers. The influence of this sleep pattern extended far beyond individual households into the very structure of Renaissance society. City governments had to account for the fact that a significant portion of their population would be naturally awake during the middle hours of the night. This affected everything from law enforcement strategies to the timing of certain civic activities. Night markets, though not common, did exist in some Italian cities during this period. Vendors would set up small stalls during the watch hours, selling items that people might need during their midnight awakening: candles, simple foods, remedies for sleeplessness, or materials for nighttime crafts. These markets were quiet affairs, conducted in whispers and gestures, but they served a real need in communities where midnight wakefulness was the norm. The architecture of Renaissance Italian homes also reflected this sleep pattern. Many houses were designed with specific spaces intended for watchtime activities. Small alcoves near bedrooms might contain writing desks or prayer needlers. Kitchens were often positioned to allow for quiet food preparation without disturbing sleeping family members. Even the placement of windows considered the need for moonlight during the wakeful hours. Wealthy families sometimes had dedicated watchrooms, spaces furnished with comfortable seating, good lighting, and materials for various activities. These rooms were designed to be used during the midnight hours, allowing family members to pursue individual interests without disturbing others. Some of these spaces were quite elaborate, decorated with tapestries and furnished with the finest chairs and tables the family could afford. The practice of keeping watch also influenced Renaissance Italian literature in fascinating ways. Many poems and stories from this period reference the quiet contemplation that occurred during midnight hours. Writers would often compose during their own watch time, finding inspiration in the profound stillness that surrounded them. Some of the most beautiful lyric poetry from Renaissance Italy may have been born during these dark, quiet hours. Professional scribes and copyists found the watch period ideal for their most delicate work. The steady hand required for beautiful calligraphy was easier to maintain during the calm midnight hours than during the bustling day. Many illuminated manuscripts from Renaissance Italy show evidence of having been worked on during different times of day. You can sometimes detect subtle differences in the quality of lettering that suggest some portions were completed during the serene watch hours. Musicians also adapted to this rhythm. Composers would often work during their midnight awakening, when the silence allowed them to hear musical ideas more clearly in their minds. Performers practicing instruments had to be more considerate. But some instruments, like the lute or small percussion, could be played softly enough to avoid disturbing neighbors. The watch period became a time for musical meditation and composition. But let's talk about something that might make you squirm a bit: the bathroom situation during Renaissance nights. Chamber pots were standard equipment, and the watch period often included a practical visit to these essential vessels. Shared sleeping spaces meant that this natural function had to be managed discreetly, and the darkness provided necessary privacy. It's not glamorous, but it was a reality that shaped how people moved through their homes during midnight hours. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern contributed to better overall health in Renaissance populations, but there's intriguing evidence that it might have. The natural division of rest may have allowed for more complete sleep cycles, better dream processing, and more effective physical restoration. Some modern sleep researchers suggest that our current 8-hour continuous sleep model might actually be less optimal than the biphasic pattern our ancestors followed. The watch period also served important social functions within families. Parents would use this quiet time to check on children, ensuring they were warm and safe through the night. Elderly family members might need assistance during these hours, and the natural awakening of other household members made such care more feasible. It was a time when family bonds were quietly reinforced through small acts of attention and care. Seasonal foods played a role in watchtime activities too. During autumn, families might use their midnight hours to process preserves or prepare foods for winter storage. The cool night air was ideal for certain types of food preparation, and the quiet allowed for concentration on tasks that required precision. Spring watch periods might involve tending to seedlings or preparing garden plots for planting. The economic implications of this sleep pattern extended into trade and commerce. Merchants traveling between cities would often plan their journeys to take advantage of the natural rhythm of rest and wakefulness. Caravans might stop for first sleep, then resume travel during the watch hours when the roads were cooler and bandits less likely to be active. This created a complex web of timing that influenced trade routes and commercial relationships. Artisan guilds sometimes scheduled certain activities during the watch hours. Bakers, for instance, might begin their bread preparation during the midnight period, timing their work so that fresh loaves would be ready for the morning market. Blacksmiths might use the quiet hours for delicate metalwork that required absolute concentration. The guild system adapted to incorporate these natural rhythms into professional practice. You're drifting deeper into the nocturnal world of Renaissance Italy now, where the boundary between sleep and wakefulness has become as fluid as the candle shadows dancing on stone walls. Imagine yourself in a Neapolitan palazzo, where even the wealthy have learned to embrace this ancient rhythm, though their midnight hours unfold quite differently from those of common citizens. The religious implications of the two-sleep pattern were profound and far-reaching. The Catholic Church, which dominated Renaissance Italian life, had to grapple with how this natural rhythm fit into their theological framework. Some clergy viewed the midnight awakening as an opportunity for additional prayer and spiritual contemplation. Others worried that the dark hours might encourage sinful behavior away from the watchful eyes of the community. Monastic communities had long practiced forms of divided sleep, with various prayer services scheduled throughout the night. The secular adoption of biphasic sleep patterns meant that ordinary citizens could more easily participate in these religious observances. Lay people would often time their watch period to coincide with monastic prayer hours, creating a sense of spiritual communion across the sleeping city. The practice of keeping vigil, staying awake through the night for religious purposes, became more manageable when it aligned with natural sleep patterns. During important religious festivals or personal spiritual crises, people could extend their normal watch period into a full night of prayer and contemplation. This wasn't seen as fighting against nature, but rather as working with the body's natural rhythms for spiritual purposes. Confession practices also adapted to this sleep pattern. Some priests would make themselves available during the watch hours for private confession, recognizing that the quiet darkness provided an ideal environment for spiritual reflection and repentance. The anonymity of darkness made it easier for people to confront their sins and seek absolution. But here's where Renaissance Italian creativity really shines. They developed elaborate systems for making the most of their watch time. Wealthy families would sometimes rotate watch duties among household members, ensuring that someone was always alert for security purposes while others rested. This created a kind of domestic guard system that operated throughout the night. The practice of bundling, sharing beds with multiple family members, or even guests took on new dimensions during the watch period. People developed etiquette around moving quietly, avoiding disturbance of those still sleeping, and managing the social dynamics of shared awakening. Some households had signals or codes for communicating during these quiet hours without disturbing others. Storytelling traditions flourished during the watch period. Families would gather in whispered circles to share tales, legends, and news from the outside world. These midnight story sessions became important vehicles for preserving oral traditions and transmitting cultural knowledge. Some of the folk tales that survive from Renaissance Italy may have been refined and polished during countless watchtime tellings. The medical profession adapted its practices to accommodate this sleep pattern. Physicians would sometimes schedule house calls during the watch hours, recognizing that many patients would be naturally awake and available for consultation. The quiet environment also made it easier to conduct examinations and discuss symptoms without the distractions of daily life. Midwives found the watch period particularly useful for their practice. Many births occurred during nighttime hours, and the natural awakening of household members meant that assistance was more readily available. The calm atmosphere of the watch could also help laboring mothers relax between contractions, potentially leading to easier deliveries. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of the two-sleep pattern influenced Renaissance Italian attitudes toward time itself. Some scholars suggest that the natural division of night created a more flexible, organic relationship with temporal rhythms than our modern clock-driven society maintains. Others argue that the practice simply reflected practical adaptations to available lighting and heating technology. The influence of lunar cycles on sleep patterns was widely acknowledged during this period. Renaissance Italians believed that the moon's phases affected the quality and timing of both first and second sleep. Full moon nights might see longer or more restless watch periods, while new moon darkness could deepen both sleep phases. Whether this was based on actual physiological effects or cultural expectation remains debated. Whether patterns also shaped the watch experience. Storm nights might see families gathering together during their wakeful hours, finding comfort in shared alertness, while wind and rain battered their homes. Clear, cold winter nights provided excellent visibility for those who needed to venture outside during the watch, while hot summer nights might drive people to seek cooler spaces for their midnight activities. The development of domestic crafts was significantly influenced by the availability of this quiet, focused time. Renaissance Italian needlework, wood carving, and other detailed crafts reached extraordinary levels of sophistication, partly because artisans had these undisturbed hours to perfect their techniques. The watch period became a time when ordinary people could pursue artistic expression without the pressures of daily survival. Food preparation during the watch hours followed specific patterns. Families would often prepare simple meals or snacks that could be consumed quietly without elaborate cooking. Bread, cheese, dried fruits, and wine were common watchtime foods. The practice of eating during the midnight awakening may have influenced digestive health in ways that modern nutritionists are only beginning to understand. The social stratification of Renaissance Italian society was reflected even in sleep patterns. The wealthy could afford to heat their homes adequately, making their watch periods more comfortable. They had access to better lighting, more varied activities, and greater privacy. The poor had to be more resourceful, finding ways to stay warm and productive during their midnight hours despite limited resources. You're settling into the deepest part of the night now, where the Renaissance Italian understanding of sleep reveals itself as something far more sophisticated than our modern assumptions might suggest. Picture yourself in a Florentine artisan's workshop, where the tools of daily trade become instruments of midnight meditation, and the rhythm of first sleep, watch, and second sleep has shaped not just individual lives, but entire communities. The economic implications of the two-sleep pattern extended into virtually every aspect of Renaissance Italian commerce. Innkeepers had to accommodate travelers who expected to wake naturally in the middle of the night. Many inns developed systems for providing quiet activities during the watch hours, simple meals, basic lighting, or spaces for prayer and reflection. The hospitality industry adapted to serve guests whose sleep patterns demanded midnight attention. Shipping and maritime trade were particularly influenced by these sleep rhythms. Sailors and merchants who spent long periods at sea would often maintain the two-sleep pattern even while traveling, finding that it aligned well with the natural rhythms of ocean voyages. Ship watches could be organized around the crew's natural awakening periods, potentially improving both safety and efficiency during long journeys. The banking families that dominated Renaissance Italian finance, the Medici, the Fuggers, and others sometimes conducted sensitive business during the watch hours. The privacy and quiet of midnight provided ideal conditions for negotiations that required discretion. Some of the most important financial decisions in Renaissance history may have been made during these quiet, contemplative hours. Agricultural communities around Italian cities developed their own variations of the watch period. Farmers would use their midnight awakening to check on livestock, monitor weather conditions, or prepare for the next day's work. During harvest seasons, the watch period might be extended to allow for additional food processing or storage activities. The rhythm of rural life adapted to incorporate both natural sleep patterns and seasonal demands. The guild system that organized much of Renaissance Italian economic life had to account for the two-sleep pattern in their regulations and practices. Some guilds scheduled meetings during the watch hours, recognizing that members would be naturally alert and available. Others prohibited certain types of work during these hours to avoid disturbing neighbors or creating unfair competitive advantages. But let's talk about something that might surprise you. The development of Renaissance Italian cuisine was significantly influenced by watchtime eating habits. The practice of consuming light meals during the midnight awakening led to the creation of specific foods designed for quiet, easy consumption. Some traditional Italian dishes that we still enjoy today may have originated as watchtime foods. The preparation of preserved foods often occurred during the watch hours, when the cool night air provided ideal conditions for certain types of food processing. Families would use their midnight awakening to check on fermenting wines, aging cheeses, or drying meats. The quiet concentration possible during these hours may have contributed to the sophisticated food preservation techniques that Renaissance Italy was famous for. Spice merchants found the watch period ideal for their most delicate work. The blending of expensive spices required careful attention to proportion and quality, and the calm midnight hours provided perfect conditions for this precise work. Some of the complex spice mixtures that made Renaissance Italian cuisine famous may have been perfected during countless watchtime sessions. The practice of keeping kitchen gardens was also influenced by the two's leap pattern. Gardeners would use their midnight awakening to water plants, check for pests, or harvest herbs that were best picked during cool, dark hours. Some medicinal plants were believed to be most potent when gathered during the watch period, adding another layer of purpose to these midnight activities. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern contributed to the intellectual achievements of the Renaissance. The quiet, contemplative hours of the watch may have provided ideal conditions for the kind of deep thinking that led to artistic and scientific breakthroughs. Some scholars suggest that the natural rhythm of rest, reflection, and renewed rest created optimal conditions for creative problem solving. The development of Renaissance Italian art was certainly influenced by the availability of quiet, focused time during the watch hours. Artists would use these periods for detailed work that required steady hands and concentrated attention. Some of the finest details in Renaissance paintings and sculptures may have been created during the calm midnight hours when the artist's mind was clear and focused. The practice of keeping detailed records and accounts was often relegated to the watch period. Merchants, artisans, and even ordinary citizens would use their midnight awakening to update their financial records, plan future activities, or correspond with distant associates. The quiet concentration possible during these hours made such detailed work more accurate and efficient. Musical composition flourished during the watch hours. Composers found that the profound silence allowed them to hear musical ideas more clearly in their minds. The development of polyphonic music, with its complex interweaving of multiple melodic lines, may have been aided by the concentrated listening possible during the quiet watch period. The copying and illumination of manuscripts was particularly well suited to watch-time work. Scribes could maintain the steady hand and focused attention required for beautiful calligraphy more easily during the calm midnight hours. Many of the gorgeous illuminated books that survive from Renaissance Italy show evidence of having been worked on during different times of day, with the finest details often completed during the serene watch period. The practice of private devotion and meditation reached new depths during the watch hours. Without the distractions of daily life, people could engage in profound spiritual contemplation. Some of the mystical writings that emerged from Renaissance Italy may have been inspired by insights gained during these quiet, introspective midnight hours. You're moving deeper into the heart of Renaissance Italian nights now, where the watch period has become a sacred time of productivity and contemplation that our modern world has almost entirely forgotten. Imagine yourself in a Venetian merchant's home, where the gentle lapping of canal water against stone foundations provides a rhythmic backdrop to the quiet activities that fill the midnight hours. The legal system of Renaissance Italy had to adapt to accommodate the reality that many people were naturally awake during the middle of the night. Court records from the period show that crimes, disputes, and even business transactions frequently occurred during the watch hours. Legal scholars debated whether contracts signed during midnight hours should be considered as valid as those executed during daylight, ultimately deciding that the time of signing mattered less than the mental capacity of the signatories, notaries. The legal professionals who documented important transactions sometimes made themselves available during the watch hours for clients who preferred the privacy that darkness provided. Wills, marriage contracts, and business agreements were often finalized during these quiet hours when the parties could discuss sensitive matters. Without fear of eavesdropping neighbors or business rivals, the practice of dueling, while officially discouraged by authorities, often took place during the watch hours when the participants could meet without attracting unwanted attention. The darkness provided cover for these illegal but socially accepted methods of settling disputes. Some of the most famous duels in Renaissance Italian history occurred during the quiet hours when most of the city slept. But here's something that might make you chuckle. The development of what we might call midnight etiquette became quite elaborate in Renaissance Italian society. People developed complex social rules for interacting during the watch hours. Speaking was done in whispers, movements were deliberately quiet, and even the lighting of candles followed specific protocols to avoid disturbing others. The practice of calling hours extended into the night, with close friends and family members sometimes visiting during the watch period. These midnight social calls were considered perfectly acceptable, provided they were conducted quietly and didn't disturb sleeping household members. Some of the most intimate friendships and romantic relationships of the Renaissance may have been nurtured during these discreet, nighttime visits. Servants and household staff had their own watchtime responsibilities. They would use their natural awakening to check on fires, secure the house against intruders, or prepare for the next day's activities. The relationship between masters and servants took on different dynamics during these quiet hours, when social hierarchies were somewhat relaxed by the intimacy of shared wakefulness. The education of children was influenced by the two sleep pattern in fascinating ways. Parents would use the watch period to provide individual instruction to their children, taking advantage of the quiet environment for focused learning. Some children received their most important education during these midnight hours, when they had their parents' undivided attention. Apprentices in various trades would often receive their most advanced instruction during the watch hours. Master craftsmen found that the quiet, distraction-free environment was ideal for teaching complex techniques. The relationship between master and apprentice deepened during these shared midnight hours of focused work and learning. The practice of keeping detailed diaries and personal records flourished during the watch period. Many Renaissance Italians used their midnight awakening to reflect on the day's events and record their thoughts and observations. Some of the most valuable historical documents from this period are personal journals that were written during the contemplative watch hours, correspondence with distant friends, family members, and business associates was often conducted during the watch period. Letter writing required concentration and careful thought, making the quiet midnight hours ideal for this important form of communication. The postal systems of Renaissance Italy had to accommodate the fact that much important correspondence was written during the night hours. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern influenced the development of Renaissance Italian philosophy. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have created optimal conditions for the kind of deep thinking that characterized Renaissance intellectual life. Some scholars suggest that the watch period provided a unique mental state that was particularly conducive to philosophical insight. The practice of keeping household accounts and managing family finances was often relegated to the watch hours. The quiet concentration possible during these periods made detailed financial work more accurate and efficient. Many Renaissance Italian families developed sophisticated systems for tracking income, expenses, and investments that were maintained during their midnight awakening. The development of new technologies and inventions was sometimes pursued during the watch hours. inventors and craftsmen found that the quiet, distraction-free environment was ideal for experimenting with new ideas and techniques. Some of the technological innovations that emerged from Renaissance Italy may have been perfected during countless watchtime sessions of trial and error. The practice of food, preservation, and storage was carefully managed during the watch hours. Families would use their midnight awakening to check on fermenting foods, monitor storage conditions, or process seasonal ingredients. The cool night air and quiet concentration possible during these hours made such work both practical and efficient. The maintenance of household, tools, and equipment was often conducted during the watch period. Craftsmen would use their natural awakening to sharpen tools, repair equipment, or prepare materials for the next day's work. This quiet maintenance time helped ensure that tools remained in optimal condition for productive daytime labor. The practice of planning and organizing future activities reached sophisticated levels during the watch hours. People would use their midnight awakening to think through upcoming projects, plan travel itineraries, or organize household activities. The contemplative nature of the watch period made it ideal for this kind of forward-thinking preparation. You're nestled now in the deepest understanding of how Renaissance Italian nights unfolded, where the watch period has revealed itself as far more than just an interruption in sleep. It was a cornerstone of daily life that shaped everything from intimate relationships to grand artistic achievements. Picture yourself in a Sienese painter's studio, where the tools of artistic creation become instruments of midnight magic, and the quiet hours between first and second sleep nurture creativity in ways our constantly illuminated world struggles to comprehend. The artistic communities of Renaissance Italy developed particularly sophisticated approaches to using their watch time. Painters would often use these quiet hours for the most delicate aspects of their work, fine details, subtle color mixing, or the careful application of gold leaf that required absolute steadiness of hand. The profound silence of the watch period allowed artists to achieve levels of concentration that were nearly impossible during the bustling daylight hours. Sculptors found the midnight hours ideal for planning and sketching their three-dimensional works. The quiet environment allowed them to visualize complex forms more clearly, and many would spend their watch time creating detailed drawings that would guide their daytime carving. Some of the most beautiful Renaissance sculptures may have been conceived during these contemplative midnight hours. The practice of artistic collaboration took on unique dimensions during the watch period. Master artists and their apprentices would often work together during these quiet hours, sharing techniques and insights that required focused attention. The intimacy of shared midnight work created bonds between teacher and student that went far beyond mere professional relationships. But let's talk about something that might make you squirm with recognition: the development of what we might call midnight anxiety among Renaissance Italians. Not everyone adapted easily to the two-sleep pattern, and some people struggled with the natural awakening, finding themselves restless or worried during the watch hours. Physicians of the time developed various remedies for this condition, including herbal teas, meditation techniques, and specific physical exercises designed to promote calm during the midnight awakening. The practice of dream interpretation reached new levels of sophistication during this period, partly because the divided sleep pattern created more opportunities for vivid dreaming. People would often use their watch time to reflect on and analyze the dreams from their first sleep, sometimes recording them in special dream journals. The transition between first sleep and the watch period was believed to be particularly rich in meaningful dreams. Religious art and devotional practices were profoundly influenced by the watch period. Many of the most moving religious paintings from Renaissance Italy depict scenes of midnight prayer or contemplation, reflecting the artist's own experiences of spiritual reflection during the quiet hours. The development of private devotional art, small paintings or sculptures designed for personal meditation, was closely tied to the practice of watchtime prayer. The creation of illuminated manuscripts reached extraordinary heights during this period, partly because scribes and illuminators had access to these quiet, focused hours for their most delicate work. The intricate details and perfect lettering that characterize Renaissance Italian manuscripts often show evidence of having been completed during the calm watch period, when the artist's hand was steadiest and attention most focused. Musical composition and performance adapted to the rhythms of divided sleep in fascinating ways. Composers would often work during their watch time, finding that the profound silence allowed them to hear musical ideas more clearly in their minds. Some instruments, particularly those that could be played softly, became associated with watchtime performance, leading to the development of specific musical genres designed for quiet, contemplative listening. The practice of musical improvisation flourished during the watch hours. Musicians would gather in small groups during their natural awakening, creating spontaneous compositions that reflected the meditative mood of the midnight period. These informal musical sessions often produced ideas that would later be developed into formal compositions during daylight hours. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern contributed to the distinctive character of Renaissance Italian music. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have influenced the development of musical forms that emphasized both dramatic intensity and peaceful resolution. Some scholars suggest that the biphasic sleep pattern created a unique aesthetic sensibility that can be heard in the music of the period. The development of domestic architecture was significantly influenced by the need to accommodate watchtime activities. Homes were designed with specific spaces intended for midnight use, small alcoves with good natural lighting, quiet corners for reading or writing, and areas where people could pursue various activities without disturbing sleeping family members. The practice of interior decoration also reflected the importance of the watch period. Rooms were furnished and decorated with consideration for how they would look and feel during the quiet midnight hours. The placement of mirrors to reflect candlelight, the selection of fabrics that would be comfortable for extended sitting, and the arrangement of furniture to facilitate quiet activities all reflected the central role of the watch period in daily life. The development of domestic lighting technology was driven partly by the needs of the watch period. Candle makers experimented with different wax formulations and wick designs to create products that would burn steadily and quietly during the midnight hours. Oil lamp designs were refined to provide better light with less smoke and odor, making them more suitable for indoor use during the watch period. The practice of keeping household inventories and managing domestic supplies was often conducted during the watch hours. The quiet concentration possible during these periods made detailed record-keeping more accurate and efficient. Many Renaissance Italian households developed sophisticated systems for tracking food supplies, household goods, and personal possessions that were maintained during their midnight awakening. The education of young women was particularly influenced by the watch period. Since formal schooling was limited for girls, much of their education occurred within the household, and the quiet watch hours provided ideal opportunities for mothers to teach their daughters essential skills. Reading, writing, needlework, and household management were often taught during these intimate midnight sessions. The practice of courtship and romantic relationships took on unique dimensions during the watch period. Young couples would sometimes arrange to meet during their natural awakening, finding that the quiet darkness provided privacy for intimate conversations that would have been impossible during the busy daylight hours. Some of the great love stories of the Renaissance may have been nurtured during these secret midnight encounters. The development of personal hygiene practices was influenced by the availability of quiet time during the watch period. People would use their midnight awakening for bathing, grooming, or other personal care activities that required privacy and concentration. The practice of elaborate hair arrangements, popular among wealthy Renaissance Italian women, often required the extended time and careful attention that the watch period provided. You're drifting now into the most intimate understanding of Renaissance Italian nights, where the watch period reveals itself as a time when the boundaries between public and private life dissolved into something altogether more mysterious and personal. Imagine yourself in a Bolognese scholar's study, where ancient texts and modern insights merge in the flickering candlelight, and the quiet hours between sleeps become a laboratory for both intellectual discovery and personal transformation. The scholarly communities of Renaissance Italy developed particularly sophisticated approaches to using their watch time for intellectual pursuits. University professors would often use these quiet hours for their most challenging research, finding that the profound silence and freedom from interruption allowed for deeper concentration than was possible during busy daylight hours. Some of the most important academic breakthroughs of the Renaissance may have occurred during these contemplative midnight sessions. Students, too, adapted their study habits to take advantage of the watch period. The quiet environment was ideal for memorizing complex texts, working through difficult mathematical problems, or engaging in the kind of deep reading that Renaissance education demanded. Many students found that material studied during the watch hours was retained more effectively than information learned during the distracting daylight periods. The practice of scholarly correspondence flourished during the watch hours. Academics would use their midnight awakening to write detailed letters to colleagues, sharing research findings, debating theoretical points, or collaborating on complex projects. The postal networks of Renaissance Italy carried thousands of letters that had been composed during these quiet, contemplative hours. But here's something that might surprise you. The development of what we might call midnight melancholy became a recognized phenomenon during this period. Not everyone found the watch hours peaceful or productive. Some people experienced what physicians of the time called nocturnal triste, form of sadness or anxiety that seemed to emerge specifically during the quiet midnight hours. This condition was treated with various remedies, including special diets, herbal preparations, and specific forms of meditation or prayer. The practice of personal reflection and self-examination reached new depths during the watch period. Many Renaissance Italians used their midnight awakening for what we might recognize as early forms of psychotherapy's systematic examination of their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. This introspective practice may have contributed to the psychological sophistication that characterizes much Renaissance Italian literature and art. The development of autobiography and personal narrative was significantly influenced by the availability of quiet time for reflection during the watch hours. Many of the most important personal accounts from Renaissance Italy were written during these contemplative midnight periods, when individuals had the time and mental space to examine their lives with unusual depth and honesty. The practice of confession and spiritual counseling adapted to accommodate the natural rhythms of the watch period. Some priests made themselves available during the midnight hours for private consultation, recognizing that the quiet darkness provided an ideal environment for honest self-examination and spiritual guidance. The intimacy of these midnight spiritual encounters may have contributed to the development of more sophisticated approaches to pastoral care. The creation of devotional literature flourished during the watch hours. Religious writers would use their midnight awakening to compose prayers, meditations, and spiritual reflections that captured the unique mood of the quiet nighttime hours. Some of the most beautiful devotional texts from Renaissance Italy were clearly written during the contemplative watch period. The practice of charitable work and community service was often organized around the natural rhythms of the watch period. Wealthy families would use their midnight hours to plan charitable activities, prepare donations for the poor, or organize community assistance programs. The quiet time for reflection may have contributed to the sophisticated charitable institutions that characterized Renaissance Italian cities. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern influenced the development of Renaissance Italian political thought. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have created optimal conditions for the kind of complex political analysis that characterized the period. Some scholars suggest that the watch period provided a unique mental state that was particularly conducive to understanding the particular intricate power relationships that dominated Renaissance Italian politics. The practice of keeping detailed political records and diplomatic correspondence was often conducted during the watch hours. The quiet concentration possible during these periods made sensitive political work more secure and efficient. Many of the most important political documents from Renaissance Italy were written during the discrete midnight hours when the risk of espionage or interference was minimized. The development of new forms of government and political organization was sometimes pursued during the watch hours. Political theorists and practical administrators would use their midnight awakening to think through complex governmental problems, design new institutions, or plan political reforms. The contemplative nature of the watch period made it ideal for this kind of systematic political thinking. The practice of intelligence gathering and espionage was naturally suited to the watch hours. Spies and informants would use the cover of darkness and the natural awakening of their contacts to gather and transmit sensitive information. The two-sleep pattern provided perfect cover for these activities. Since midnight movement and conversation were considered normal rather than suspicious, the maintenance of family honor and social position required constant attention during Renaissance Italy, and much of this work was conducted during the watch hours. Families would use their midnight awakening to plan social strategies, discuss marriage alliances, or coordinate responses to threats to their reputation. The privacy of the watch period made it ideal for these sensitive family discussions. The practice of managing household finances and business investments was often relegated to the watch hours. The quiet concentration possible during these periods made complex financial calculations more accurate and efficient. Many Renaissance Italian families developed sophisticated systems for tracking their economic activities that were maintained during their contemplative midnight awakening. You're settling into the deepest rhythms of Renaissance Italian life now, where the watch period has become a sacred space that exists between the conscious and unconscious worlds, between the demands of daily survival and the deeper currents of human experience. Picture yourself in a Paduan physician's home, where the understanding of sleep and wakefulness has evolved into something far more sophisticated than our modern medical knowledge might suggest. The medical profession of Renaissance Italy developed remarkably nuanced understandings of the two-sleep pattern and its effects on human health. physicians observed that patients who maintained regular first sleep, watch, and second sleep cycles often showed better overall health than those whose sleep patterns were disrupted. They theorized that the natural division of rest allowed for more complete physical restoration and better mental balance. The practice of medical diagnosis was often conducted during the watch hours, when both physician and patient were naturally alert but in a calm, contemplative state. Doctors found that patients were often more honest about their symptoms during these quiet midnight consultations, and the peaceful environment allowed for more thorough examinations. Some of the most accurate medical observations from Renaissance Italy may have been made during these intimate watchtime encounters. The preparation of medicines and herbal remedies was particularly well suited to the watch period. The quiet concentration required for proper mixing of compounds, the careful measurement of ingredients, and the precise timing of various preparation steps all benefited from the focused attention possible during the midnight hours. Many of the most effective remedies from Renaissance Italy were prepared during these contemplative sessions. But let's talk about something that might make you uncomfortable: the reality of pain and illness during the watch hours. People suffering from chronic conditions often found that their symptoms were either better or worse during the midnight awakening. Physicians developed specific treatments designed to address these nocturnal variations in health, creating a sophisticated understanding of how illness patterns related to natural sleep rhythms. The practice of caring for the dying was profoundly influenced by the watch period. Family members would naturally be awake during the midnight hours to provide comfort and assistance to dying relatives. The quiet, contemplative atmosphere of the watch period was considered ideal for the spiritual preparation that death required. Many Renaissance Italians died during these peaceful midnight hours, surrounded by naturally wakeful family members. The development of surgical techniques was influenced by the availability of quiet, focused time during the watch hours. Surgeons would use their midnight awakening to plan complex procedures, practice delicate techniques, or study anatomical texts. The steady hand and concentrated attention possible during the watch period may have contributed to advances in surgical skill that characterized Renaissance Italian medicine. The practice of midwifery was particularly adapted to the rhythms of the watch period. Many births occurred during nighttime hours, and the natural awakening of household members meant that assistance was readily available. Midwives would often spend their watch time preparing for upcoming births, organizing supplies, or studying the complex knowledge that their profession required. The care of children was significantly influenced by the watch period. Parents would use their natural midnight awakening to check on sleeping children, ensuring they were warm and safe through the night. The quiet hours also provided opportunities for intimate bonding between parents and children that were difficult to achieve during the busy daylight hours. The practice of wet nursing, where women would breastfeed children other than their own, was organized around the natural rhythms of the watch period. Wet nurses would often feed multiple infants during their midnight awakening, taking advantage of the quiet hours when both they and the babies were naturally alert. This practice created complex networks of childcare that extended throughout Renaissance Italian communities. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern influenced child development in Renaissance Italy. Some scholars suggest that children who grew up with the natural rhythm of divided sleep developed different cognitive patterns than those raised with continuous sleep schedules. The evidence is limited, but there are intriguing hints that the watch period may have contributed to the intellectual precocity that characterized many Renaissance Italian children that the education of children was profoundly influenced by the availability of quiet time during the watch hours. Parents would use their midnight awakening to provide individual instruction to their children, taking advantage of the peaceful environment for focused learning. Some children received their most important education during these intimate midnight sessions with their parents. The practice of storytelling and oral tradition was particularly suited to the watch period. Families would gather during their natural awakening to share tales, legends, and historical accounts that preserved cultural knowledge. These midnight storytelling sessions created powerful bonds between generations and helped maintain the rich oral traditions that characterized Renaissance Italian culture. The development of children's games and entertainment was influenced by the need for quiet activities during the watch hours. Children learned to play games that could be conducted in whispers, to engage in activities that wouldn't disturb sleeping family members, and to find entertainment in the contemplative atmosphere of the midnight awakening. The practice of discipline and moral instruction was often conducted during the watch hours, when the quiet environment allowed for serious conversations between parents and children. The intimacy of the midnight setting made these discussions more effective than similar conversations during the distracting daylight hours. The preparation of children for adult responsibilities was significantly influenced by the watch period. Young people would shadow their parents during the midnight hours, learning the skills and knowledge they would need as adults. This apprenticeship in watchtime activities created a smooth transition from childhood dependence to adult responsibility. You're moving now into the most profound understanding of how Renaissance Italian society organized itself around these natural rhythms of rest and wakefulness, where the watch period has become the hidden foundation upon which entire communities built their most important relationships and activities. Imagine yourself in a Genoese merchant's counting house, where the ledgers of daily commerce tell only half the story, and the real business of life unfolds in the quiet hours between first and second sleep. The commercial life of Renaissance Italy was profoundly shaped by the two-sleep pattern in ways that extended far beyond individual households. Merchants would often schedule their most important negotiations during the watch hours, finding that the quiet, contemplative atmosphere was conducive to honest dealing and careful consideration of complex agreements. Some of the most significant commercial contracts in Renaissance Italian history were negotiated during these midnight hours. The practice of international trade was influenced by the need to accommodate different sleep patterns across various cultures. Italian merchants traveling to other parts of Europe or the Mediterranean had to adapt their natural two-sleep rhythm to local customs, often finding that their midnight alertness gave them advantages in negotiations with partners who were less accustomed to productive nighttime activity. Banking and financial services adapted to serve clients during the watch hours. Some banks offered discreet nighttime services for customers who preferred to conduct their financial business away from the prying eyes of competitors or tax collectors. The privacy of the midnight hours made these services particularly valuable for wealthy clients who needed to manage complex financial arrangements. But here's something that might surprise you: the development of what we might call midnight markets in some Renaissance Italian cities. These weren't large, public markets, but rather small, discreet trading sessions that occurred during the watch hours. Merchants would meet quietly to exchange goods, information, or services that required privacy or special handling. The practice of inventory management and warehouse operations was often conducted during the watch hours. The quiet environment was ideal for careful counting, quality assessment, and record keeping that required absolute accuracy. Many merchants found that their most reliable inventory work was done during the contemplative midnight hours, when distractions were minimal. The development of new products and services was sometimes pursued during the watch hours. Craftsmen and entrepreneurs would use their midnight awakening to experiment with new techniques, test innovative ideas, or develop products that might give them competitive advantages. The quiet, focused environment of the watch period was ideal for this kind of creative commercial work. The practice of quality control and product inspection was particularly well suited to the watch hours. The careful attention required to assess the quality of textiles, metals, foods, or other goods benefited from the concentrated focus possible during the midnight awakening. Many of the quality standards that made Renaissance Italian products famous were maintained through careful watch-time inspection. The management of supply chains and logistics was often planned during the watch hours. Merchants would use their midnight awakening to coordinate shipments, plan transportation routes, or organize the complex networks of suppliers and distributors that made Renaissance Italian commerce possible. The quiet time for reflection allowed for more sophisticated logistical planning. The practice of commercial correspondence was heavily concentrated during the watch hours. Merchants would use their midnight awakening to write letters to business partners, update clients on shipment status, or negotiate new deals with distant associates. The postal networks of Renaissance Italy carried thousands of commercial letters that had been written during these quiet, contemplative hours. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern gave Renaissance Italian merchants competitive advantages over their European rivals. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have created optimal conditions for the kind of strategic thinking that characterized successful Renaissance Italian business practices. Some scholars suggest that the watch period provided a unique mental state that was particularly conducive to commercial innovation. The development of accounting and bookkeeping systems was significantly influenced by the availability of quiet time during the watch hours. The careful attention required for accurate financial record-keeping benefited from the focused concentration possible during the midnight awakening. Many of the sophisticated accounting methods that emerged from Renaissance Italy were developed and maintained during watchtime sessions. The practice of risk assessment and insurance was often conducted during the watch hours. Merchants would use their midnight awakening to analyze potential risks, calculate insurance needs, or develop strategies for protecting their investments. The contemplative nature of the watch period made it ideal for this kind of careful risk analysis. The management of partnerships and business relationships required constant attention during Renaissance Italy, and much of this work was conducted during the watch hours. Partners would use their midnight awakening to discuss business strategies, resolve conflicts, or plan future ventures. The privacy of the watch period made it ideal for these sensitive business discussions. The practice of market analysis and competitive intelligence was naturally suited to the watch hours. Merchants would use their midnight awakening to analyze market trends, assess competitor activities, or develop strategies for gaining market advantages. The quiet time for reflection allowed for more sophisticated market analysis than was possible during the busy daylight hours. The development of new trade routes and commercial opportunities was sometimes pursued during the watch hours. Merchants and explorers would use their midnight awakening to study maps, plan expeditions, or develop strategies for entering new markets. The contemplative nature of the watch period made it ideal for this kind of strategic commercial planning. You're drifting deeper now into the most intimate secrets of Renaissance Italian society. where the watch period reveals itself as the hidden engine that drove not just individual lives, but entire cultural movements. Picture yourself in a Roman cardinal's private study, where the flickering candlelight illuminates manuscripts that contain the seeds of ideas that will reshape European civilization, and the quiet hours between sleeps become a crucible for both spiritual and intellectual transformation. The religious life of Renaissance. Italy was profoundly shaped by the natural rhythms of the two-sleep pattern. Monastic communities had long practiced forms of divided sleep, but the secular adoption of biphasic sleep patterns meant that ordinary citizens could more easily participate in the spiritual disciplines that had previously been limited to religious professionals. The watch period became a time when the boundary between sacred and secular life dissolved into something altogether more mysterious. The practice of private prayer and meditation reached unprecedented depths during the watch hours. Without the distractions of daily life, people could engage in forms of spiritual contemplation that were simply impossible during the busy daylight hours. Some of the most profound mystical experiences recorded in Renaissance Italian spiritual literature occurred during these quiet, contemplative midnight sessions. The development of new forms of religious art was significantly influenced by the availability of quiet time for spiritual reflection during the watch hours. Artists would use their midnight awakening to contemplate religious themes, visualize sacred scenes, or develop the spiritual insights that would later be expressed in their paintings and sculptures. Some of the most moving religious art from Renaissance Italy was conceived during these contemplative watchtime sessions. But let's talk about something that might make you squirm with recognition: the development of what we might call spiritual anxiety during the watch hours. Not everyone found the quiet midnight time conducive to peaceful prayer or meditation. Some people experienced what spiritual directors of the time called nocturnal scruples, forms of religious doubt, or spiritual distress that seemed to emerge specifically during the vulnerable hours of the night. The practice of spiritual direction and pastoral counseling adapted to accommodate the natural rhythms of the watch period. Priests and spiritual advisors would often make themselves available during the midnight hours for private consultation, recognizing that the quiet darkness provided an ideal environment for honest spiritual examination and guidance. These intimate midnight encounters between spiritual director and directee created bonds of trust and understanding that were difficult to achieve during the more formal daylight hours. The development of devotional literature flourished during the watch hours in ways that transformed Renaissance Italian spirituality. Religious writers would use their midnight awakening to compose prayers, meditations, and spiritual reflections that captured the unique mood of the quiet nighttime hours. These texts were specifically designed to be read during the watch period, creating a new genre of literature that spoke directly to the spiritual needs of people experiencing their natural midnight awakening. The practice of pilgrimage and religious travel was influenced by the two-sleep pattern in fascinating ways. Pilgrims would often plan their journeys to take advantage of the natural rhythm of rest and wakefulness, traveling during the cooler night hours and resting during the heat of the day. The watch period provided ideal opportunities for prayer and reflection during these spiritual journeys. The creation of religious music was profoundly influenced by the contemplative atmosphere of the watch hours. Composers would often work during their midnight awakening, finding that the profound silence allowed them to hear sacred melodies more clearly in their minds. Some of the most beautiful religious music from Renaissance Italy was conceived during these quiet, contemplative sessions. The practice of religious education and catechesis was significantly enhanced by the availability of quiet time during the watch hours. religious teachers would use their midnight awakening to prepare lessons, study theological texts, or develop new approaches to spiritual instruction. The focused attention possible during the watch period made this educational work more effective and profound. Historians still argue whether the two-slip pattern influenced the development of Renaissance Italian theology. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have created optimal conditions for the kind of deep theological reflection that characterized the period. Some scholars suggest that the watch period provided a unique mental state that was particularly conducive to understanding complex spiritual truths. The practice of religious controversy and theological debate was often conducted during the watch hours, when the participants could engage in serious discussion without the distractions of daily life. Some of the most important theological developments of the Renaissance may have emerged from these midnight conversations between scholars, priests, and educated laypeople. The development of new forms of religious community and spiritual fellowship was influenced by the shared experience of the watch period. People who maintained similar sleep patterns naturally found themselves awake at the same times, creating opportunities for spiritual companionship and mutual support that were unique to the midnight hours. The practice of religious charity and social service was often organized around the natural rhythms of the watch period. Religious communities would use their midnight hours to plan charitable activities, prepare aid for the poor, or organize assistance programs for the needy. The quiet time for reflection and prayer may have contributed to the sophisticated, charitable institutions that characterized Renaissance Italian religious life. The care of the sick and dying was profoundly influenced by the watch period. Religious communities and individual believers would naturally be awake during the midnight hours to provide spiritual comfort and assistance to those in need. The quiet, contemplative atmosphere of the watch period was considered ideal for the spiritual preparation that serious illness or approaching death required. The development of new forms of religious architecture was influenced by the need to accommodate watchtime activities. Churches and religious buildings were designed with spaces intended for midnight prayer and meditation, including small chapels, prayer alcoves, and areas where people could engage in private devotion during their natural awakening hours. You're nestled now in the most profound understanding of how Renaissance Italian culture wove itself around these ancient rhythms of sleep and wakefulness, where the watch period has become the secret thread that connects individual experience to the grand tapestry of historical change. Imagine yourself in a Ferrari's court, where the nobility has refined the art of midnight living into something approaching perfection, and the quiet hours between sleeps become a stage for the most sophisticated expressions of Renaissance civilization. The court culture of Renaissance Italy developed particularly elaborate approaches to the watch period, transforming the natural midnight awakening into opportunities for refined entertainment, intellectual discourse, and artistic creation. Noble families would host intimate gatherings during the watch hours, bringing together poets, musicians, philosophers, and artists for conversations that were impossible during the formal daylight hours. The practice of courtly love and romantic poetry flourished during the watch hours, when lovers could meet in private and poets could compose verses that captured the mysterious atmosphere of the midnight hours. Some of the most beautiful love poetry from Renaissance Italy was written during these contemplative watchtime sessions, when the combination of darkness, quiet, and natural alertness created perfect conditions for romantic expression. The development of court entertainment was significantly influenced by the need for activities suitable to the watch period. Musicians developed repertoires of quiet, contemplative pieces designed for midnight performance. Storytellers crafted tales that were perfect for whispered recitation during the watch hours. Even games and diversions were adapted to suit the intimate atmosphere of the midnight awakening. But here's something that might surprise you. The development of what we might call midnight diplomacy in Renaissance Italian courts. The privacy and intimacy of the watch hours made them ideal for sensitive political negotiations, secret alliances, and delicate diplomatic communications. Some of the most important political decisions in Renaissance Italian history were made during these discreet midnight consultations. The practice of court intrigue and political maneuvering was naturally suited to the watch hours. The darkness provided cover for secret meetings, private conversations, and the exchange of sensitive information. The natural alertness of the midnight awakening made participants more mentally sharp for these complex political games, while the quiet atmosphere allowed for subtle communications that would have been impossible during the busy daylight hours. The education of noble children was profoundly influenced by the availability of quiet time during the watch hours. Tutors would use the midnight awakening to provide individual instruction in languages, literature, philosophy, and the arts. The focused attention possible during the watch period allowed for more intensive and effective education than was possible during the distracting daylight hours. The practice of patronage and artistic sponsorship was often conducted during the watch hours. Noble patrons would use their midnight awakening to meet with artists, discuss new projects, or evaluate completed works. The contemplative atmosphere of the watch period was ideal for the kind of serious aesthetic discussion that characterized Renaissance Italian patronage relationships. The development of court libraries and scholarly collections was significantly influenced by the watch period. Nobles would use their midnight awakening to read, study, and organize their collections of books and manuscripts. The quiet concentration possible during these hours made serious scholarly work more effective and enjoyable. The practice of correspondence and diplomatic communication was heavily concentrated during the watch hours. Noble families would use their midnight awakening to write letters to political allies, negotiate marriages, or coordinate responses to political challenges. The privacy of the watch period made it ideal for sensitive communications that required discretion. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern influenced the development of Renaissance Italian political culture. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have created optimal conditions for the kind of sophisticated political thinking that characterized the period. Some scholars suggest that the watch period provided a unique mental state that was particularly conducive to understanding the complex power relationships that dominated Renaissance Italian politics. The management of noble households and estates was often conducted during the watch hours. The quiet concentration required for overseeing complex domestic operations, managing financial affairs, or coordinating the activities of large staffs benefited from the focused attention possible. During the midnight awakening, many noble families developed sophisticated systems for household management that were maintained during their contemplative watchtime sessions. The practice of genealogy and family history was particularly suited to the watch hours. Noble families would use their midnight awakening to study family records, plan marriages, or develop strategies for advancing family interests. The contemplative nature of the watch period made it ideal for this kind of long-term family planning. The development of new forms of artistic expression was influenced by the unique atmosphere of the watch period. Court artists would experiment with techniques and styles that captured the mysterious mood of the midnight hours. Some of the most innovative art from Renaissance Italy was created during these quiet, contemplative sessions when artists had the freedom to explore new ideas without the pressures of formal commissions. The practice of collecting and connoisseurship was often pursued during the watch hours. Noble collectors would use their midnight awakening to study their acquisitions, plan new purchases, or organize their collections. The quiet concentration possible during the watch period allowed for more careful appreciation of artistic and cultural objects. The maintenance of court ceremonies and traditions was significantly influenced by the watch period. Court officials would use their midnight awakening to plan elaborate ceremonies, coordinate complex protocols, or prepare for important state occasions. The contemplative nature of the watch period made it ideal for this kind of detailed ceremonial planning. You're drifting now into the final understanding of how Renaissance Italian society built itself around these natural rhythms, where the watch period reveals itself as the foundation not just of individual lives, but of an entire civilization's approach to time, rest, and human potential. Picture yourself in a Milanese workshop where the last candle burns low, and the artisan's hands move with the practiced precision that comes only from countless midnight hours of dedicated craft. The artisan communities of Renaissance Italy developed perhaps the most sophisticated approaches to utilizing the watch period for productive work. Master craftsmen discovered that the quiet, distraction-free hours of the midnight awakening were ideal for their most delicate and demanding tasks. The steady hand and focused concentration required for fine metalwork, intricate carving, or detailed painting were more easily achieved during the contemplative watch hours than during the bustling daylight periods. The guild system that organized Renaissance Italian craft production had to adapt to accommodate the reality that much of the finest work was being done during the watch hours. Some guilds developed specific regulations governing nighttime work, while others created special categories of membership for craftsmen who specialized in watchtime production. The quality standards that made Renaissance Italian crafts famous throughout Europe were often maintained through careful work conducted during these quiet midnight hours. The practice of apprenticeship was profoundly influenced by the watch period. Master craftsmen would use their natural midnight awakening to provide the most intensive and focused instruction to their apprentices. The intimate atmosphere of the watch hours created bonds between master and student that went far beyond mere professional relationships, fostering the kind of deep knowledge transfer that characterized Renaissance Italian craft traditions. But let's talk about something that might make you reflect on your own relationship with work and rest. The development of what we might call craft meditation during the watch hours. Renaissance Italian artisans discovered that the repetitive, focused work of their crafts could induce states of deep concentration and spiritual awareness that were similar to formal meditation practices. The watch period became a time when work and worship merged into something altogether more profound. The development of new techniques and innovations was often pursued during the watch hours. Craftsmen would use their midnight awakening to experiment with new materials, test innovative approaches, or perfect techniques that required absolute concentration. Some of the most important technological advances in Renaissance Italian crafts may have been developed during these quiet, contemplative sessions of trial and experimentation. The practice of quality, control, and perfectionism reached extraordinary levels during the watch period. The careful attention required to assess and improve the quality of crafted objects benefited from the focused concentration possible during the midnight awakening. Many of the masterpieces that survive from Renaissance Italy show evidence of the kind of meticulous attention to detail that was only possible during the contemplative watch hours. The maintenance of tools and equipment was often conducted during the watch period. Craftsmen would use their natural awakening to sharpen tools, repair equipment, or prepare materials for the next day's work. This quiet maintenance time helped ensure that tools remained in optimal condition for productive work, contributing to the consistently high quality of Renaissance Italian crafts. The practice of collaborative work and knowledge sharing was influenced by the shared experience of the watch period. Craftsmen who maintained similar sleep patterns would naturally find themselves awake at the same times, creating opportunities for professional collaboration and mutual assistance that were unique to the midnight hours. The development of artistic styles and aesthetic movements was significantly influenced by the contemplative atmosphere of the watch period. Artists would use their midnight awakening to reflect on their work, develop new approaches, or explore aesthetic ideas that required deep concentration. Some of the most distinctive characteristics of Renaissance Italian art may have emerged from these quiet, contemplative sessions of artistic reflection. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep pattern contributed to the extraordinary artistic achievements of Renaissance Italy. The natural rhythm of rest, contemplation, and renewed rest may have created optimal conditions for the kind of creative work that characterized the period. Some scholars suggest that the watch period provided a unique mental state that was particularly conducive to artistic innovation and excellence. The practice of artistic criticism and aesthetic evaluation was often conducted during the watch hours. Artists, patrons, and connoisseurs would use their midnight awakening to study works of art, discuss aesthetic principles, or develop new approaches to artistic appreciation. The quiet concentration possible during the watch period allowed for more careful and thoughtful aesthetic analysis. The preservation and restoration of artistic works was particularly suited to the watch hours. The delicate work required to maintain paintings, sculptures, and other art objects benefited from the steady hand and focused attention possible during the midnight awakening. Many of the Renaissance Italian artworks that survive today may owe their preservation to careful restoration work conducted during these contemplative watchtime sessions. The documentation and recording of artistic techniques was often pursued during the watch hours. Artists would use their midnight awakening to write treatises, create instructional drawings, or develop systematic approaches to teaching their crafts. Some of the most important technical manuals from Renaissance Italy were written during these quiet, contemplative periods when artists had the time and mental space to reflect systematically on their practices. The development of artistic patronage relationships was significantly influenced by the watch period. Artists and patrons would often meet during the midnight hours to discuss new projects, evaluate completed works, or negotiate the terms of artistic commissions. The intimate atmosphere of the watch period was ideal for the kind of personal relationships that characterized Renaissance Italian patronage. You're approaching now the deepest understanding of how the Renaissance Italian approach to sleep and wakefulness created a foundation for human flourishing that our modern world has largely forgotten. Picture yourself in a quiet Tuscan villa as the first hints of dawn begin to touch the eastern sky, where the watch period is drawing to its natural close, and the gentle return of drowsiness signals the approach of second sleep. The transition from the watch period back into second sleep was as carefully cultivated as the initial awakening had been. Renaissance Italians developed sophisticated rituals and practices for easing back into rest, understanding that the quality of second sleep was crucial for feeling refreshed and energized for the coming day. This wasn't simply a matter of lying back down and hoping for the best. It was a deliberate process of preparing mind and body for the final phase of nighttime restoration. The practice of gratitude and reflection became central to this transition period. People would use the final minutes of their watch time to mentally review the quiet activities they had accomplished, offer thanks for the peaceful hours of productivity or contemplation, and set intentions for the dreams and rest that would follow. This practice of conscious transition helped ensure that second sleep would be deep and restorative. The physical preparation for second sleep involved specific rituals that Renaissance Italians found conducive to renewed rest. They might adjust their bedding, change positions, or perform gentle stretching movements that helped their bodies settle back into sleep. The goal was to create optimal conditions for the final hours of nighttime rest that would carry them refreshed into the new day. But here's something that might surprise you about the end of the watch period. Renaissance Italians often experienced what we might call watch completion anxiety, a reluctance to let go of the peaceful, productive hours and return to sleep. The watch period had become so valued as a time of personal accomplishment and spiritual connection that some people struggled to transition back into unconsciousness. The development of specific prayers and meditations for the end of the watch period helped address this transition. Religious and secular texts from the period include numerous examples of second sleep prayers, brief devotions, designed to ease the mind from the focused alertness of the watch period back into the receptive state necessary for restorative rest. These prayers often emphasized surrender, trust, and the natural rhythm of human needs. The practice of dream preparation became sophisticated during this transition period. Renaissance Italians believed that the mental state with which you entered second sleep significantly influenced the quality and content of your dreams. They developed techniques for seeding their dreams with specific intentions, questions, or spiritual aspirations that they hoped to explore during the final sleep phase. The management of household responsibilities during this transition required careful coordination. Family members had to balance their individual needs for returning to sleep with collective responsibilities for security, fire maintenance, and care of children or elderly relatives. Households developed subtle communication systems for managing these transitions without disturbing those who had already returned to second sleep. The influence of seasonal changes on the watch to second sleep transition was carefully observed and accommodated. During long winter nights, this transition might occur well before dawn, allowing for several hours of second sleep. Summer nights compressed this timing, sometimes requiring people to return to sleep just as the first light was appearing on the horizon. The practice of couples intimacy was often timed to this transition period, when both partners were naturally alert but beginning to feel the gentle pull of returning drowsiness. The combination of mental clarity and physical relaxation created ideal conditions for both emotional and physical intimacy that strengthened marital bonds and contributed to family stability. The development of specific foods and beverages for the watch-to-sleep transition became part of Renaissance Italian domestic culture. Light snacks that promoted drowsiness, herbal teas with calming properties, or small amounts of wine were used to ease the transition back into rest. These transition foods were different from the more substantial meals that might be consumed during the middle of the watch period. The practice of mental preparation for the coming day often occurred during this transition time. People would use the final minutes of their watch period to mentally organize their plans, set priorities, or visualize successful completion of important tasks. This forward-looking reflection helped ensure that they would wake from second sleep with clear intentions and focused energy. Historians still argue whether the quality of second sleep was superior to first sleep in terms of restoration and dream content. Some evidence suggests that second sleep, occurring after the productive watch period, was characterized by particularly vivid dreams and deep physical restoration. The mental satisfaction of having accomplished meaningful work during the watch may have contributed to more restful and restorative final sleep. The coordination of second sleep timing within households required sophisticated social awareness. Family members had to balance their individual sleep needs with consideration for others, who might still be engaged in watch activities. The development of household sleep etiquette helped manage these complex social dynamics without creating conflict or resentment. The practice of spiritual surrender was central to the transition into second sleep. Renaissance Italians understood that the shift from the active, conscious engagement of the watch period to the passive receptivity of sleep required a deliberate letting go of control. This spiritual dimension of the sleep transition was seen as essential for both physical rest and spiritual development. The influence of the watch period on overall sleep quality was carefully observed by Renaissance Italian physicians and natural philosophers. They noted that people who used their watch time productively and meaningfully often reported better overall sleep satisfaction and more energy during waking hours. The biphasic pattern seemed to create a more complete and satisfying rest experience than continuous sleep. The development of bedtime stories and lullabies was influenced by the need to ease the transition from watch alertness back into sleep. These weren't primarily for children. Adults also used gentle, repetitive narratives or songs to help their minds shift from the focused attention of the watch period to the receptive state necessary for second sleep. The practice of progressive relaxation and body awareness was often employed during this transition period. Renaissance Italians developed techniques for systematically releasing physical tension, slowing breathing, and allowing their bodies to settle back into the deep rest that would carry them through until dawn. You're settling now into the final, most peaceful understanding of how Renaissance Italian nights concluded, where the gentle return to second sleep becomes not just a biological necessity, but a conscious choice to trust in the natural rhythms that have sustained human life for millennia. Picture yourself in that same quiet chamber where we began, but now the candle has burned lower, the shadows have grown longer and softer, and your body is beginning to remember the ancient wisdom of surrendering to rest. The second sleep of Renaissance Italians was often described as the most restorative and dream-rich portion of their entire rest cycle, having accomplished meaningful work during their watch period, having connected with family members or engaged in spiritual practice, having used their natural alertness for productive purposes. They could surrender to this final sleep phase with a sense of completion and satisfaction that our modern world rarely experiences. The dreams that came during second sleep were often more vivid, more meaningful, and more easily remembered than those of first sleep. Renaissance Italian dream interpretation traditions suggest that the mental clarity achieved during the watch period somehow prepared the mind for more profound dream experiences. People would often wake from second sleep with insights, creative solutions, or spiritual revelations that seemed to emerge from this final, deep rest phase. The physical restoration that occurred during second sleep was enhanced by the mental satisfaction of the watch period. Having used their midnight hours productively, people could relax more completely, allowing their bodies to engage in the deep repair and restoration processes that occur during the most profound phases of sleep. This may have contributed to the overall health and longevity that characterized many Renaissance Italian communities. The transition from second sleep to morning awakening was typically gentler and more natural than our modern, alarm-driven wake-ups. People would emerge from their final sleep phase feeling refreshed and alert, ready to engage with the new day's challenges and opportunities. The Biphasic sleep pattern seemed to create a more satisfying and complete rest experience. But perhaps, most importantly, the Renaissance Italian approach to sleep and wakefulness created a different relationship with time itself. Instead of viewing night as simply a void to be endured between productive days, they understood darkness as containing its own gifts, its own opportunities for growth, connection, and accomplishment. The watch period wasn't stolen time or lost sleep, was a treasured part of life's rhythm as you imagine yourself settling into that final, deep sleep. Feel how your body naturally relaxes when it has been honored with meaningful activity during its natural awakening. Notice how your mind can let go more easily when it has been given the gift of quiet contemplation and focused attention. Sense how your spirit feels more at peace when it has been nurtured with the kind of gentle, unhurried time that the watch period provided. The Renaissance Italians understood something that we have largely forgotten, that human beings are not machines designed to run continuously, but rather complex beings who thrive on rhythms of activity and rest, engagement and reflection, community and solitude. Their two-sleep pattern honored these natural rhythms in ways that supported not just individual well-being, but entire communities of flourishing human life. As the candle flame grows smaller and the shadows deepen around you, allow yourself to feel the wisdom of this ancient approach to rest. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your muscles relax and settle. Let your mind release its grip on the day's concerns and worries. Trust in the natural rhythm that has sustained human life for thousands of years. The gentle alternation of consciousness and rest that allows both body and spirit to restore themselves completely. The Renaissance Italian night is drawing to its close now, and second sleep is calling you into its embrace. Feel how different this surrender feels when it comes not from exhaustion, but from completion, not from collapse, but from conscious choice. This is how human beings were meant to rest, not as an escape from life, but as an essential part of living fully and well. Let the gentle rhythm of your breath carry you deeper into this restorative sleep, knowing that you have honored the ancient wisdom of your ancestors, that you have touched something timeless and true about what it means to be human. The watch period may be ending, but its gifts will remain with youth, the memory of quiet productivity, gentle contemplation, and the profound peace that comes from living in harmony with your deepest natural rhythms. Sleep now, as the Renaissance Italians slept, with the satisfaction of time well spent and the trust that rest, when it comes at the right time and in the right way, is not a luxury but a necessity, not a weakness but a strength, not an ending but a preparation for all the beautiful possibilities that tomorrow will bring.